Hey guys, it's Dan. This is going to be another Green Dragon gaming video. This this is now the fourth time that I'm trying to record this thing, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm gonna basically breeze through this video because I'm just, truth be told, I'm tired of talking about this battle report. It's a shame too because it was a great game. I can't bring myself to do another hour and 15 minute video on this content. This was against Chris, who goes by Eggs PR on the forums, and his vampires. Uh, the game size was 4,500 points. We've been hopping back and forth between 6,000 and 4,500 because we're gearing up for Brawler Bash in March, and uh, there's another tournament in February, which is going to be 4,500 points. So my wife is next to me while I'm recording this. The poor woman has sat through the same battle report 3 times now.
I could probably give the battle report.
She could probably do this report for us. So she's making hand motions because she knows the key points that I want to hit in each of these slides. So I'm going to shake things up. I'm going to talk about totally different stuff now. You wait. Deployment was diagonal, and the secondary objective was hold your ground. Chris, I should mention too, was the ETC team captain for Team USA last year. He's a phenomenal player. So going into this, I was pretty intimidated, just because he's such a good player. My list, it's basically the same as the last one, the one with which I played against Brett in the last battle report. The only difference is that I've dropped an arcane engine to take some militia and some writers. And then I dropped a few models from each of my hordes to take a second unit of militia as well. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same. His list is unlike anything I've seen before in a vampire list. He's got his a vampire general, von Karnstein, which just sounds silly. It's von Karnstein. It's only got a 6-up save though, so toughness 4, 3 wounds, 6-up save. You can see though that his plan here is to put all the characters in a unit with the wraiths up front, so that the expensive characters are safe in the second rank. He's got 2 units of 31 zombies specifically, and then 2 units of 8 vampire spawn, which I'm not terribly sure how I'm going to deal with, just because I don't really have the shooting to take those guys down. 2 units of 6 wraiths, which I think are usually a discounted unit, one that many people overlook, and I think they're a great choice. 2 units of dogs and some fellbat chaff. So deployment. This, I'll be quick here. We went back and forth a couple of times. He put down all of his chaff, the 3 units of bats, 2 units of dogs. I put down my militia, my pistoliers, my riders, and then 2 blocks. So at that point, he pretty much knew where my army was going, and he said, "I'm going to drop everything with the intent to go second," which caught me off guard when he said that, but it makes sense when you think about it, because with this objective, he wants to have the last turn of the game to be able to move anything in that he has to get that objective, but also because he really doesn't need first turn like maybe a shooting list would. That desperately needs that first turn, or even a close combat oriented list like warriors, something like that will want to get across the board as fast as possible. He doesn't need that, because with the center of his army here, he really does. I don't think he has any interest in getting into combat with these guys. It's really the vampire spawn and the wraiths that he wants to go in and do most of the heavy lifting. So he deploys everything like that. I deploy pretty much standard fare as far. I keep the halberdiers back a little bit to hopefully try to deal with these vampire spawn. But then on the right-hand side, the only thing I did that's a little unorthodox is I put my volley gun there to where I think he's 23 inches away, maybe 22, 21, somewhere in that zone, so that I can get 1 round of shooting in first turn, and I'm betting that he won't be able to charge me his first turn either. So I'm banking on getting 2 rounds of shooting in on these guys. So that's my thought process anyway. Otherwise, as far as spells are concerned, I'm running alchemy. He's got 3 wizards, all of which are apprentices, all of which have invocation, and I think that in addition to the bound spell with his general for raise dead, his Necromancer's got the sniper spell out of Evocation. So I've got Glory to Gold, which is the magical attacks, flaming attacks, +1 armor piercing, the 2 magic missiles, one of which is metal shifting, so not terribly useful against his list, and then +2 armor as well. So he wins the roll-off for second turn, so I get the first turn. And then my movement phase looks like this. I'm really not committing much here because I'm moving up my Imperial Guard in such a way that I'm hoping I'll be able to move to either side of this impassable terrain, depending on where his big unit goes. So that's why I'm really not committing much. The riders move up where you see them here. I'm sacrificing them effectively. I figured that through the shooting here, I'll be able to put a few wounds on this unit. I'll stand and shoot, do some damage. Close combat, we strike simultaneously. I'll do some damage, and then he'll overrun because he really doesn't have a choice here. He can't let the Pistoliers go and just move up into the woods here because then I'll shoot him some more with both units, and then the Pistoliers will be behind his line. So he's got to deal with the Pistoliers. And my hope, though, is that killing them and overrunning, he won't get off the table. So then I'll be staring at the board edge for a turn, and I'll be able to shoot him for what will, at that point, be 3 rounds of combat, or rounds of shooting. Because it'll be first turn, second turn, he's facing the board edge, third turn, he flies back into the woods, and I'll shoot him in my third turn as well. So either way, yes, I'm sacrificing the Pistoliers, but I'm taking him out of the game for 3 turns. So that's a worthwhile sacrifice, in my opinion. Magic, nothing happens. Shooting phase, though, you can see that they're already down to 6 from the Pistoliers and the volley gun, which is great. Cannon knocks a guy off over here, and then we're into his turn 1. So he does charge me, and you can see, though, that he's already down to 5 guys, and he had 6. So from the stand and shoot, I knocked another guy off, and there wasn't much else to record this turn. I do have an overview shot because I've done this battle report 4 times now, so I know. However, he does kill me, but I knock another guy off in combat, so you can see he's down to 4 guys now. And I don't have a picture of it, but he does make that overrun off the board, which is fine. And then in his one thing of note, I'm getting mixed up now, so I can't remember if I've said this already in this video or not. But I'm a long-time vampire player. I played through 5th, 6th, 7th, and a little bit of 8th edition. And I know that the most dangerous spell that the vampires have is Invocation, in whatever form it is. Simply because that's the spell that, especially in the first couple of turns, most people let go. Say, oh yeah, I'm not worried about that, go ahead. But that's where they'll get you, man. Because without being able to raise wounds up and bring back guys that have been, because you're going to lose a lot of guys in combat, without being able to bring guys back, or without being able to build them up early on in the game to where they're harder to deal with when you've got 50, 60 models in a unit. If you're shutting down Invocation consistently, they're going to have a heck of a time winning the game. So that's what I have in my mind when I play against vampires, is I shut down Invocation at whatever cost. And sometimes that means he's going to get some scary spells through that I'd rather see not get through. But I firmly believe that if you're consistently shutting down Invocation, that your opponent's going to be in a worse off spot, especially late game. So there you go, food for thought. But the reason I bring this up is because in his first magic phase, he rolls a 2-to-1 magic phase. So he rolls 2 dice, I get 1, he gets 2, and he gets Invocation through because I can't stop it. Into my turn 2 then. So I move up. I'm still very hesitant, and in retrospect, I wish I hadn't have been, because I'm waiting for him to come to me. But looking at the game as a whole, and even you can even see it here early on, he's got no interest in coming to me. I don't have the shooting to force him forward, and he's just waiting for those perfect charges with his vampire spawn to come in and hit the flank somewhere or hit some of the softer targets. So he's got no interest in rushing up at me. So my turn 2, I shimmy forward a little bit. Magic Face. I knock off some wraiths. You can see here he's hopped everything over here to the other side of the impassable terrain. Remember, they were here in the beginning. Now they're over here. The reason for which is because he's afraid of the magic missile combination that I have with my wizard, which is the 2d6 or 3d6 magic missile from alchemy, then with the lore attribute making them flammable, and then casting fireball. So if I can get that combination off on one of these units, I'll wipe one off in a turn. So he wants nothing to do with that. So he's hopped over here, but you can see I've reformed this unit, put the wizard on the other side, and I'm just rinsing and repeating each turn. So he doesn't let both spells through, but one does get through and knocks a few guys off. The mortar, it misses the first turn, misfires the second turn. We were joking about the mortar. It's the kind of weapon that is going to fail you for 2 games in a row, and then one game is just going to be on fire. And it's going to be against some poor elf player who's got big hordes of 50 spearmen or executioner or something like that. Because this thing, if it connects with one of those units, it's going to take out like half the unit. So yeah, this is one of the games where it's not doing much yet. So, and the steam tank then misfires right after the mortar. It doesn't hurt itself like the mortar did, but it's much worse. Actually, it takes itself out of the game, so it can't shoot the rest of the game, which is awesome. And this is where I've missed a phase or turn of the game here. So this is actually the end of movement, my turn 3. I just talked about my shooting phase turn 2. So in his turn 2, he's shuffled forward a little bit. Remember, my cannon is out of commission now, and the steam tank at the time was back over here. So he's sort of condensed himself back up here into the center. I'm just trying to get an idea of where I'm going to go with things. Most notably, the vampire spawn are now 2 ranks instead of just the 1 because he's not worried about the cannon. And otherwise, yeah, I mean, I don't know. He's not spreading himself out in the way that he was. He's just sort of condensing back into the middle. And I don't have a picture of it, but the vampire spawn do fly back onto the table and are hiding into the woods here, just on the edge, but he does have 2 models in, so with 4 in the unit, he does get soft cover. So then into my turn 3, because nothing happens in the magic phase. Into my turn 3, I'm still shuffling forward like this. At this point, he's committed to this side with the impassable terrain. The problem, though, is I really can't bring the Imperial Guard over there now because he's got so much stuff over here that I don't think the steam tank, who I'm certain is going to be locked up with some of these wraiths here at some point, I don't think the steam tank and the halberdiers will be able to take all this on. So, I don't know. I think at this point I'm thinking I'm going to take on some of this stuff here in the middle with my Imperial Guard, then hopefully swing around to take on this big block. That's what I'm aiming for anyway. Magic phase, I took a picture of this just because I wanted to show the technique. This is something Chris does that I picked up from him. Whenever magic dice are rolled up, we're used to taking our own dice into our own pool for whatever phase it is, if we're dispelling or if we're casting. What he does is he actually creates a pool for both. So if he's casting, he knows how many dispel dice his opponent has left at any given time. Because if I roll dispel dice, he takes those out of his pool as well. Just so he can glance down and know. Same thing if you're dispelling, you have your own separate power dice pool. So when your opponent casts something, you take those dice out of that power pool too. So you just know at any given time how many dice are left. It's very handy so that you don't have to constantly ask your opponent how many dice he has left. And against someone like me who habitually rolls dice in his hand, I don't usually have them on the table in front of me. I'm not trying to be sneaky or anything. It's just out of habit. I like to roll dice in my hand. You'll know at a glance how many dice are left. So it's also handy for battle report purposes because I can just take a picture of how many dice were used in the phase and know. So there you go. So this is my turn 3 magic phase. I do blast the wraiths there. I don't get both spells off, but it does look like I got the alchemy one off because the attribute is on the unit now. Steam tank, I grant +2 weapon skill, +2 initiative, which I've mentioned several times now because I've done this report 4 times. That it was a mistake because I'm trying to incentivize. I want him to charge me with his vampire spawn. I think his vampire spawn will ultimately kill the tank. However, I'll hold him in place for a couple of turns, and it will prevent him from flanking my army. But I just casted something on the tank that makes it to where I'm going to strike before him, and he's hitting me on a 4. So if I'm really trying to incentivize him charging me, that was a dumb thing to do. Shooting phase. Volley gun does its job, guys. He kills 3 of them. So out of he rolls up almost a perfect number of shots. So instead of 5.55, he rolls a 5.43, and so 24 shots, 9 wounds, not bad. So it takes that unit of 4 down to 1. So very manageable all of a sudden. And then we're into his turn 3. So he charges me. No surprise there. Over here, he charges with the wraiths and with the zombies into the flank of the militia there, hoping for a terror test, which I pass. So he ends up like that. And then the end of his movement, he's like this. So he's still shuffling around in the middle a bit. He's committed the hounds forward. And then you can see he's flown the vampire spawn over like that. It's funny, though. He measured it out, and I saw him do it. He measured from the front of this model here to the side of my steam tank, forgetting that with the pivot, I'm going to gain about an inch, inch and a half. I can't remember what it is mathematically, but it's I know it's at least an inch. So he measured it out. It's 13 inches, but it's actually 12, which on 3 dice, averages 10 and a half. It's not that far out of the realm of possibility that I'll roll a 12 on 3 dice. So I have another shot of the same thing. I've seen it 4 times now. So magic phase. This is him casting. I will say that I'll give. There's one positive aspect of recording this thing multiple times, is that I'm not surprised by any of these photos anymore. The first time I went through this and I was like, oh, I think this is turn 3, or I think this is my shooting phase, or something like that. I've done it so many times now, I know exactly what these pictures are showing and what pictures are omitted. So that is one advantage to doing this so many times. This is his magic phase. He's casted that assassination spell onto my wizard. I mentioned early in the game that I'm fully committed to shutting down invocation, whatever the cost, and this is one of the costs, is that some of these other spells will get through. So I got lucky, though. He only did 1 wound to me. He could do up to 3. And then my turn 4, the steam tank comes up short, unfortunately. Remember, odds are 10 and a half. I rolled, I think, exactly that. I rolled an 11, needed a 12. So didn't quite make it. Can't be too mad, though. It's a little frustrating, but you can't be too mad. And the rest of my movement looks like this. I'm finally committing things forward. Imperial Guard charging, because it's turn 4. I need points. And then the Halberdiers move up like this. Into magic phase, I don't know why I cast the bounce spell with the prelate, and he lets it go because who cares? They're going to wipe out those dogs anyway. And then the mortar finally does something. It kills, I think, 15 zombies. Good on you. And then in the shooting phase, the repeater gun does some damage there. I regret not using the breath weapon. I should have. I'm so used to saving it for the first round of combat to try to get some combat resolution in there. But it was a mistake. I should have thrown some extra shots at these guys, try to whittle them down a bit more. And then, killed the dogs. And pivot like that. That's the one problem with playing against undead, is that you never get to set up charges and like cascading charges, you know what I mean? So like if they'd been Chaos Warhounds, remember they were up here, the way that I had resolved the charge against them. So I think there were 2 or 3 left at the end of that combat. I would have overrun into the wraiths if you go center to center, but because they're undead, they just pop. My options are to pivot, reform, or overrun straight forward. And had I done that, I would have run into the terrain before I hit the wraiths. So it limits your options in that you really have to deliberately charge each unit on the board. You can't accidentally run into anything or not accidentally overrun into something. So I pivot like that so that he can't flank charge me with the vampire spawn, because they can easily fly over that steam tank. And then his turn 4, he he charges with this wraith out of the unit, forces a terror test onto this unit of halberdiers who fail, because you can see how far away they are from the general and the BSB. So they're rocking leadership 7, so they fail. He then redirects into the state troops, who, remember, have already passed a terror test. So there's no way they're passing the second one, so they fail and run. And then the zombies catch them and run them down. It's funny, I actually tried talking Chris out of this charge, and it wasn't because I was trying to be shady. It certainly worked out in his favor. But I mentioned this exact scenario where he wound up, And I said, listen, if I pass, it's a 50-50 shot I fail this leadership test. If I pass, okay, my unit's going to be right over here, and you're going to have a Wraith sitting between me and your big bunker unit with all your characters in it. And remember, 50-50 is what we're looking at. And I would have then charged him in my turn, popped him even just for combat res, and overrun into this bunker. And that would be exactly where I wanted him. And he said, no, it's worth the risk. And it did work out, so I can't deny that. But this is what I said. I really hope this is not what happens to you, because that's a horrible way to lose that bunker. But it worked out. And the rest of his turn 4 movement looks like this. And he chaffs up my Imperial Guard. You can see he's charged to the Wraithson, because why not? And then the Vampire Spawn move over here. And this is a shame, because these poor Halberdiers are going to keep reforming to face. But he's never going to let them charge in the front, because, they'll do, if they charge these Halberdiers in the front, they'll do 20-something wounds. But I'm still going to have 3 ranks of attacks back. And that'll do a serious amount of damage to that unit. So he'll keep flying around me and eventually charge something soft, and they'll just keep uselessly reforming to phase. This is where I skip another turn as well. So this is my shooting phase, turn 5. And this was his turn 4 movement. So forgive me, I missed a couple more pictures, but there really wasn't much else to his turn 4. Combat with the Wraiths, he does 1 or 2 wounds to me. The big note is that I forgot to reform, which isn't a big deal as far as him having combat res, but I want to take it away from him, so that if I do get lucky and get a wound or 2 through and he fails to wound me, that I might actually do some damage for combat res, which is hard to do if he's got +1 from a flank. Otherwise, the big thing that I miss is the beginning of my turn 5. I do rally with my Halberdiers who are fleeing from that failed terror check, remember? So they flip around. And in my magic phase, I cast something out of alchemy that puts the flammable tribute onto his weakened unit of vampire spawns. So that's what was missed there in the photos. So into my turn 5 shooting now, the cannon for what will likely be its last shooting phase. Because remember, this unit of vampire spawns, eyeing them up, misfires for a second time. So remember, some turns, some games it's going to be on fire, some games it's going to do nothing, and this is the nothing game. And end of my turn 5, I had charged, quite obviously, at the beginning of turn 5 into the unit of Fellbats that were chaffing me up. I charged with both the Imperial Guard and the State Militia, with the hope that the Militia would overrun into this unit of bats. If they rolled up a 8 or a 9, I think they rolled like a 4 for their overrun. One interesting thing, though, is that and I went to move the unit 1 inch apart, because I clearly reformed with the Imperial Guard as well at the end of that combat, and overran with the Militia, as I mentioned. But I attempted to move them 1 inch apart, and Chris rightly pointed out, he said, no, that once you've legally broken the 1 inch rule, there's nothing that actually forces these 2 units apart. There's no rule mechanic that pushes them 1 inch apart, as that would if you didn't actually break the 1 inch rule to begin with. So because, and it doesn't happen often, but because this unit reformed 180 degrees, and because this unit overran straight forward, they're flush up against one another. It looks goofy, and it felt wrong leaving it that way, because I wanted them to be 1 inch apart. But there's no mechanic that actually forces that. So there you go. Learn something new every game. And then this combat, we're whittling each other down. Okay, and then we're into his turn 5. So a couple charges here. He charges with the Wraith, who again forces another terror test on this unit that just reformed. Fortunately, though, it passes. It failed the first one, passed the second one. So that's perfect odds. And then the vampire spawn here charge into the front of the unit there. And then over here, I got to tell you something, guys. This is, if there was one rule that I would like to see changed, it's how charges are resolved against war machines. And I'm sure there are plenty of people listening to this who would agree. Simply because it's the one rule that seems to allow the most abuse as far as lining charges up that really should not be allowed. So, like, just take this charge, for example. And there's nothing against my opponent. He's a great guy, a very gracious player. And I don't blame him for doing this, because I would have done the exact same thing. My frustration is with the fact that the rules allow for this. He was over here, remember, basically facing the Halberdiers, because the Halberdiers turned to face them and they were parallel with one another. So resolving that charge, center of his frontage to the center of my mortar, should have made it to where his frontage was basically parallel with the table edge, meaning that once he killed the mortar, as he will, he would have overrun onto the other side of the hill somewhere. As it stands, he was able to resolve the charge because, no, you can't do whatever you want, but you can basically do whatever you want when you're resolving these charges, so long as you're following the normal legal charge procedures. Makes it to where he can very easily overrun into the rear of these halberdiers. And I just don't feel that from where he started, he should be able to do that. That's my opinion. But there you go. My only hope here really is that if once he kills the mortar, that he rolls poorly for his overrun, because that would mean if he, because I think this is 8 or 9 inches, but that would mean that if he ends up maybe say rolling a 6 or a 7, that these halberdiers, they'll kill both of these guys in combat, because remember, I got the flammable attribute off on this unit, and this unit has the flaming banner. So they'll kill these vampire spawn, and then pop the wraith, and then turn to face the other unit of vampire spawn. So that's my only hope right now to save this unit. He, in his magic phase, pops up a unit of bat swarms. I'm presuming just to try to draw dispel dice out. But I let it go. The only thing that the state militia could have charged were the zombies, and they're not going to cut through those guys in one turn. And I don't know what this shot's trying to show, but he did shaft me up in the movement phase, but I thought I already had a picture of that. Combat, we're still beating on each other. So he kills the mortar, overruns, and yeah, he makes it. So that's not going to go well. This is where I'm really missing the veteran upgrade for heavy infantry, because it made them not just weapon skill 4, but initiative 4, which would have meant that I would have been striking simultaneously, which would have been huge. But as it stands, I'm not. I'm initiative 3. He goes first, rolls 30-something attacks, kills 20-something models, and that's where we sit at the end of combat. My only saving grace was that I am steadfast, because he has no ranks, because they fly and they're light infantry. Still, I passed a leadership, I guess it would have been a leadership 6 steadfast check, because I'm 7 -1 from fear. So yeah, good on these guys. Imperial Guard, my last turn, they charge in to the Fellbats, not only to pick up those points, but to try to overrun to get into range for leadership and BSB. State militia charge in there, because why not? And then this caught me off guard when I decided I was going to do it, but I was wondering if it surprised him at all. I had 2 options here with this arcane engine. I could have moved down to support the halberdiers to grant them distracting, but I really figured that was a foregone combat. So I figured I need to pick up points. I'll charge in here. Even if the impact hits don't do anything, I'll have the flank and the charge bonus for combat resolution. And I figured if he doesn't roll well for his attacks, I might pop him through combat res. And then nothing happens in the magic phase because I'm locked in combat. And then this is where the Imperial Guard overrun to, which you can see is now granting leadership and rerolls to that unit, which is great. I was hoping he would charge me in the flank, but I don't think he's dumb enough to do that, because his vampire, you can see his general's right up there in the front now with the Wraith out of the unit, and if he could charge me in the flank, he'll probably he'll certainly win combat, but I'll hold and then turn to face him and kill his vampire. So he won't do that. And yeah, they win this combat, pop those wraiths, pick up those points, which is awesome, and it spares my steam tank and keeps those 440 points in my pocket. And this combat, I needed 5 guys to stay alive, and they would have been on a rerollable leadership 8. And I have 3 left. He kills just enough to where I'm not steadfast anymore, and so they break. And then, of course, since he has no ranks, you have to randomize who to run from. We do end up randomizing this unit, so they flee that way, which makes the most sense looking at it. He killed all those guys, poor rats. And then this is where things stand at the end of turn 6. So you can see here, this is why having the last turn in the scenario is such a big deal, because I have the 1 scoring unit here. The militia are scoring because they're not skirmishing and they don't have pistols, which is another advantage to just the 2-hand weapon cheap build for these guys. But they're locked up with these zombies. So he's got the 2 scoring units within 6 inches. I have 1 that guarantees him the scenario points. And then, oh man, insult to injury, guys. I told you I was shutting down Invocation all game. He cast that assassination spell on my general and gets it through. I did try to stop it, but he gets it off. And then does 2 wounds to him because it doesn't allow armor saves, and that's all my general has is that rerollable 1-up armor. Oh, can you imagine? Got lucky. And then this goes surprisingly well for the militia. I thought we were going to pummel each other. I thought he was going to do like 5 wounds to me, but if you math it out afterwards, there's no way that should have happened. Yeah, he does 1 wound to me, which is still below average, and I do, I think, 8 or 9 to him. 15 attacks. They were like elite troops all of a sudden hitting on 3s. So I win the combat handily. However, it doesn't matter. It's not nearly enough to pop the unit. And this is where we end up. So 3 points, that combat down here was a huge swing for him. So that was like a 600-point unit. So that was and not to mention the mage in there. So it ends up that through victory points, it's a 12-8 victory in Chris's favor. And then with the objective that he got right there at the end, it swings it to a 15-5 in his favor. So a great game, a wonderful opponent. I mentioned a very gracious opponent. He's a great guy to chat with while you're playing. And I learned a lot from this game too, not only about how to play my list, but also how to play in general. Some of these top players, I mentioned seeing a couple turns in advance. They can not only do that, and I think for the first time ever, I'm not good enough player to be able to do this consistently, but I saw what was going to happen when these vampires spawned like 2 turns in advance. I knew he was going to charge the rear of that unit of halberdiers by charging the mortar and overrunning. I just felt like there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it. I was just hoping for a little bit of luck on my side. But what these top players do, when I set up a game and look at my opponent's army, I'm thinking, how can I 20-0 this guy? How can I massacre my opponent? And I'm thinking, I'm going to get my Imperial Guard in this unit of skeletons. I'm going to whittle them down, and my steam tank's going to come over here. And it's, in reality, even against a not great opponent, a 20-0 victory is a very hard thing to achieve, and it's not a realistic goal game to game. And what these top players do, and Chris explained it was great to sit down and chat with him afterwards because he explained what his goal was from the beginning. And it was enlightening for me because he said, I had no interest in engaging with your unit of Imperial Guard because he called it a demi Death Star. It's not a true Death Star because it doesn't have enough points to be a Death Star. But when you have all these buffs up, this unit is not something you want to be in combat with. So he says, I had no interest in getting in combat with that thing. My goal was to avoid it, chaff it up, and go after the halberdier blocks and some of the other lighter stuff. And then ultimately secure the victory at the end, which is why from even the deployment phase, he knew I want the last turn. I'm going to go for turn 2 because I know I'm not going to be able to take down that demi Death Star. I like that phrase. I know I'm not going to be able to take that thing down, so I need to be able to ensure that I can secure the secondary objective victory points to pull out a win. And that's exactly what he did. So he, from start to finish, had a plan. He executed it. Whereas I, from the beginning of the game, I'm thinking, how am I going to 20-0 this ETC captain? That's just not a realistic goal. So going forward, I'm going to try to do better at that, to have more realistic goals set, starting even in the deployment phase. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I apologize if this felt fast, because it was. I've just done this so many times now. And as always, like, subscribe, share if you'd like to. We're just happy to have you guys here. And until next time, thanks for watching and happy gaming.